What if your house was breathing? When Nate moves into a quiet neighborhood on Pine Street, something feels wrong immediately. Not the silence, not the neighbors, the floor. At night, he feels it, pulsing beneath his feet like a heartbeat that doesn't belong to him. Then he finds the basement door, locked, sealed, and breathing back. Because whatever is under this house, it isn't trapped, it's waiting.
Welcome to the Haunted Horror Half-Hour horror stories that haunt your mind.
The first thing Nate noticed wasn't the size of the house or the way his mom kept smiling like this was a fresh start. It was the smell. It hit him the moment he stepped through the front door. Subtle, but wrong. Not mildew, not garbage, not even the usual dusty, closed-up house scent. This was sharper, colder, like the inside of a freezer that had been unplugged for too long, mixed with something older, mineral, hollow, like a cave that had never seen light. "You smell that?" Nate asked, dropping his backpack by the stairs. His mom was already halfway into the kitchen, her voice echoing slightly as if the house swallowed it before letting it out. "That's just old pipes, honey. We'll air it out." Nate didn't answer. He wasn't sure why, but the smell felt intentional. Like it wasn't just there. It was coming from somewhere. Waiting. He moved slowly through the living room, his sneakers creaking against the hardwood. Every step carried a faint vibration. Not sound. Not exactly. A pressure. So soft he almost missed it. Then it happened again. A faint, rhythmic pulse beneath his feet. Nate froze. It wasn't loud enough to hear, but he felt it travel up through his legs. A steady pattern. Not random. Not pipes. Breathing. He shifted his weight, and the sensation stopped. For a second, the house felt completely still. Like it was listening back. "Start bringing boxes in," his mom called from outside. The moment broke. Nate swallowed and grabbed the nearest box, carrying it toward the hallway. As he passed the kitchen, something caught his eye. A door. Low. Narrow. Painted the same off-white as the walls, but slightly warped, like it didn't quite belong in the frame. The basement. There was a heavy metal padlock looped through the handle. Nate stopped. "That wasn't in the pictures," he said. His mom stepped in behind him, arms full of dishes. "What?" He pointed. "The lock." She barely glanced at it. "Probably just an old safety thing. We'll get a key from the realtor." Nate stepped closer. The metal wasn't rusted like it should have been. It looked newer, clean in a way the rest of the house wasn't. Another pulse rolled up through the floor, stronger this time. Nate's hand hovered inches from the lock. The smell was stronger here, colder, sharper, and underneath it, something almost sweet. His fingers brushed the metal. For a split second, the pressure beneath his feet synced perfectly with his touch. In, out, in, out. Nate yanked his hand back. Behind him, his mom laughed lightly. "Come on, don't tell me you're scared of a basement." Nate didn't answer. He was staring at the thin gap beneath the door. Because just for a moment, he was sure something on the other side had breathed back. Nate stood on the sidewalk, the afternoon sun feeling strangely thin, as if the light couldn't quite penetrate the atmosphere of Pine Street. He needed to get away from the rhythmic thrumming of the floorboards, but the outside offered little comfort. He saw a group of kids sitting on a driveway 3 houses down, huddled over a pile of trading cards. As Nate approached, the air seemed to chill. He tried for a casual wave. "Hey, I'm Nate. Just moved into 14. The kids didn't look up at first. Then, in a movement so synchronized it made Nate's skin prickle, they all turned their heads. Their faces were curiously blank, devoid of the typical neighborhood curiosity. 14, a girl in a faded denim jacket whispered. She didn't say it like a number. She said it like a diagnosis. "Yeah, nice place," Nate lied, his voice cracking. "Though the basement door has this weird padlock on it. You guys have those?" The cards were forgotten. The boy closest to Nate gripped a shiny holographic card so hard it crinkled. "Rule 1, the boy said, his voice dropping to a flat, rehearsed monotone. "We don't talk about the basements. We don't look at the vents. And we never, ever stay out after the porch lights flicker." "Why?" Nate asked, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "Is there mold or something?" "Don't," the girl snapped. Her eyes darted toward his, then back. "Just stay upstairs, Nate. If you hear the humming, turn up the TV. If you feel the breathing, go to sleep." Feeling a heavy gaze on his neck, Nate turned around. Across the street, at number 9, an old man sat in a high-backed wooden chair. He wasn't rocking. He wasn't reading. He was just staring at Nate, his eyes wide and unblinking, like a bird of prey. Nate's eyes wandered down to the man's porch. The basement bulkhead door was visible from the street, and across the weathered wood, jagged red letters had been spray-painted. "Don't go down." Nate walked toward the curb, finding a strange courage in his unease. "Hey, sir?" The old man didn't move a muscle, but his voice carried across the lawn like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "You're the new one." "Why does your door say that?" Nate pointed at the warning. "Did something happen?" The man finally blinked, a slow, wet movement. "Because the ones who wrote it aren't around to explain it anymore," he rasped. "And neither are the ones they wrote it for." He leaned forward, the shadow of the porch roof masking his face in darkness. "The street doesn't want neighbors, boy. It wants more voices for the choir." Nate didn't sleep well. He lay on his mattress, still on the floor, still surrounded by half-open boxes, and stared at the ceiling while the house made its noises. Old houses always made noises. He knew that. But old houses didn't breathe. By morning, he'd convinced himself it was pipes, pressure in the walls, something structural and boring and completely explainable. He believed that right up until he walked downstairs and saw the basement door hanging open. Not wide open, just an inch, maybe 2. The padlock sat on the floor beneath the handle, unclasped, like someone had set it down so gently it wouldn't make a sound. Nate stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long moment, not moving. "Mom?" His voice came out smaller than he intended. "Mom, did you open the basement?" She appeared from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand. "What? No, why would I?" "The lock's off." She looked at the door, then at the padlock on the floor, and her expression cycled through confusion, irritation, and then something she was clearly trying to hide. "I'll call the realtor," she said. But when she pulled out her phone, her face went still. "Number's disconnected," she said quietly. She set her mug down and walked back to the kitchen without another word. The conversation was over. Nate understood, without being told, that she needed it to be over. He turned back to the door. The gap was thin, barely enough to see anything, but the cold coming through it was immediate and total, like pressing your face against a walk-in freezer. Except freezer smelled like frost and plastic wrap. This smelled like the inside of a mouth. Nate's hand found the edge of the door. He pulled it 1 inch further open. The sound reached him before the smell did, faint, shapeless, rising up from somewhere far below the visible stairs. It took him a long moment to identify it. Humming. A child humming. A melody he couldn't name but somehow already knew. The way you know a word the second before you remember it. The cold deepened. The humming didn't stop. Nate stood there, fingers wrapped around the door's edge, while something beneath his house sang like it had been waiting a very long time to finally be heard. Nate didn't remember deciding to go down. 1 second he was standing at the top of the basement stairs, the door barely open, the humming drifting up like a thread pulling him forward, and the next, his hand was wrapped around a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. "Just looking," he whispered, though no one had asked. The beam flickered once before settling into a thin cone of pale light. He pushed the door open wider. The cold hit him immediately. Not just temperature, density. It pressed against his face, slid into his lungs, thick and damp. The smell intensified, metallic, sweet, and unmistakably alive. The humming stopped. Nate froze. Silence poured up the stairs like liquid. Then, slowly, he stepped down. The wood creaked under his weight, each step echoing longer than it should have, stretching into something hollow and distant. The flashlight shook in his hand, jittering across exposed beams, concrete walls, a water heater. Normal. Completely normal. At the bottom, Nate exhaled shakily. "See?" he muttered. "Nothing." But his voice didn't sound right. It didn't echo. It just stopped, like the room absorbed it. Nate swept the flashlight across the floor. Dust, old paint cans, a stack of warped cardboard boxes. Everything exactly where it should be in a basement no one used anymore. Except the far wall. He didn't notice it all at once. His brain resisted it, like it was trying to correct a mistake in real time. The concrete didn't match. The rest of the basement walls were smooth, poured in long, even slabs. But this section was rough, uneven, darker, like it had been added later, or broken through and sealed again. And in the center of it, a door, small, narrow, set too low into the wall, as if it had been built for someone shorter than him. Nate stepped closer without realizing he was moving. The flashlight beam trembled across the surface. Locks, so many locks, different kinds, deadbolts, chains, sliding latches, at least a dozen, bolted into the door at odd angles, overlapping like someone kept adding more, not trusting the last. Nate's stomach tightened. Every single one of them was open. Not broken, not forced, just unlatched, hanging, like they had been undone carefully, recently. The beam drifted lower, and that's when he saw them. Handprints. Dozens. No, hundreds. Smeared across the concrete, layered over each other in rust-colored streaks that looked too dark to be paint. Some were small, too small. Others dragged downward, as if whoever made them had been pulled. All of them led to the door. Nate's breath hitched. The smell was strongest here, sweet and rotten at the same time. His light climbed slowly up the door, toward the handle. Something moved. Not in the room, on the door. Nate leaned in, heart hammering, trying to focus, and realized the handprints weren't dry. They were shifting, sliding over each other, reforming, like fingers pressing from the other side. The humming came back, not from below, not from the stairs, from behind the door. Closer now, clearer, and layered. More than one voice. Nate stumbled back, the flashlight beam jerking wildly, and in that brief, violent flicker of light, the handle turned. Nate didn't realize he was backing away until his heel hit the bottom step. The basement felt smaller now, the air tighter, as if the room itself had leaned in to watch him. The flashlight beam shook across the door, across the dozens of open locks, across the wet-looking handprints that kept sliding and reforming on the concrete. The humming had stopped again, but the silence was worse. It had weight to it. It pressed against his ears and made every tiny sound in the house feel miles away. Then the door moved. Not slammed open, not creaked wide like in movies, just a slow, deliberate swing inward, as if something on the other side had gently pushed it with one finger. Cold air spilled out. Nate flinched back, covering his nose. The smell that came through was the same rotten sweet stench from the basement, but stronger now, mixed with damp earth and the stale breath of a place that had been sealed too long. The flashlight beam crossed the threshold and found not another room, but a tunnel. A narrow corridor of poured concrete stretched straight ahead into darkness, too low for an adult to stand comfortably in. The floor was littered with junk that looked wrong in a place like this. One child's sneaker with the sole half torn off, a pink school backpack flattened under dust, a metal lunchbox with cartoon stickers faded almost white. Something small and round rolled under Nate's light and stopped against the wall. A marble. He took one step forward, then another, barely breathing. The tunnel opened up just enough for him to see side passages branching off at regular intervals. He could make out more doors in the gloom. Basement doors, maybe. Old wooden frames, concrete edges, different houses, all stitched together underground like someone had connected the whole street with a hidden spine. Nate. He jerked around. Nothing behind him, just the basement, just the stairs. But the sound had come from somewhere close, soft and childlike, like a voice speaking through a pillow. His flashlight caught on something scratched into the wall beside the door. Not paint, not marker, a child's map. Pine Street was drawn in uneven lines, the houses reduced to little squares with numbers beside them. The tunnel ran beneath every single one. Arrows connected the basements like veins. Small names were written near some of the houses, but most were too faded to read. Nate leaned closer, heart thudding hard enough to hurt. The lines weren't random. They were careful, repeated, counted, like a route someone had taken before, like a game. At the far end of the map, a tiny circle had been drawn around his own house. 14. His skin went cold. The circle was still fresh. The chalk dust clung to the wall, bright against the gray concrete, and beneath it, in smaller letters, was something that had not been there before. Nate stared at it until the words stopped looking real. Then he read them. Nate comes next. Nate's flashlight beam didn't just shake, it spasmed. The words Nate comes next seemed to vibrate on the concrete, the fresh chalk shimmering like a bioluminescent fungus in the dark. It wasn't just a message, it was a deadline. He forced his eyes away from the text and back to the map. His house, number 14, was the final node in a sprawling subterranean web. Every other house on the block had a name scratched next to it, but they were all crossed out with a thick, aggressive horizontal line. Sarah, Toby, Leo, names of kids who weren't on the playground anymore, kids the neighbors didn't talk about. A drop of moisture hit Nate's neck. It was ice cold and thick. He wiped it away, and his fingers came back stained with that same rust-colored residue from the door, smelling of old pennies and decay. He looked up. The ceiling of the tunnel was pulsing. It wasn't a structural vibration. The concrete was moving in a slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction. The breathing he'd felt through the floorboards upstairs wasn't coming from the basement. It was the tunnel itself. The entire network was a lung, and he was standing inside the throat. Panic, sharp and jagged, finally cut through his shock. He turned to run back toward his basement stairs, but the light of his flashlight snagged on a new detail at the very edge of the map. Someone had drawn a tiny figure standing right where he was standing. The chalk-drawn boy on the wall held a tiny, flickering flashlight. As Nate watched, the chalk hand of the figure moved. It didn't just look like it moved. It scraped. The sound of stone on stone echoed through the corridor, a dry, screeching noise that set Nate's teeth on edge. The drawing was updating in real time. The chalk Nate began to turn its head toward the tunnel's depths. Nate mimicked the movement involuntarily, his flashlight swinging toward the darkness of the between. At the center of the network, where all the white chalk lines converged into a single blackened pit on the map, a sound erupted. It wasn't humming this time. It was the sound of 100 small, wet feet hitting the concrete at once. Slap, slap, slap. They weren't running away. They were coming home. "Mom!" Nate screamed, but the tunnel swallowed the sound instantly, replacing it with a collective, whispered intake of breath that smelled of the deep, dark earth. Nate ran. He didn't think. He didn't look back. He just turned and sprinted toward the door he'd come through, the flashlight bouncing wildly, shadows lurching across the tunnel walls like something enormous shifting in the dark. The slapping sounds faded behind him, then stopped, which was worse. He could see the door ahead, the mismatched concrete frame, the dozen hanging locks swinging gently on their latches. He was close. 20 feet, maybe 15. He ran. The door didn't get closer. Nate's legs kept pumping, his sneakers hitting concrete in a frantic rhythm, but the distance refused to shrink. Like a dream where the exit stretches the harder you chase it. He skidded to a stop, chest heaving, pointed the flashlight forward. The beam traveled maybe 30 feet before dissolving into black. The door wasn't there anymore. Wasn't anywhere he could see. Just tunnel. Just wall. Just darkness folded over more darkness. He spun around. Same thing. The corridor behind him had lengthened too, swallowing the map, the chalk writing, the branching passages. All of it gone, replaced by a straight, featureless throat of concrete that stretched endlessly in both directions. The tunnel had rearranged itself. Nate pressed his back against the wall, breathing in short, sharp pulls. That's when he heard it. Breathing. Not the tunnel's slow, structural exhale. Something closer. Something immediate. Right behind him. He spun. Nothing there. Just the dark. He took one step forward. The breathing moved with him. He stopped. It stopped. His flashlight flickered. One stuttering blink. And in that fraction of a second of total darkness, he felt it. Not heard. Felt. A presence directly behind his left shoulder. Close enough that the air between them was warmer than the rest of the tunnel. Warm and moist, like something had been breathing on the back of his neck long before he noticed. The light stabilized. Nate stared straight ahead and focused every nerve ending he had on the space behind him. The breathing resumed. Slow. Patient. Perfectly matching his own inhale and exhale, beat for beat, as if whatever was behind him had spent a long time learning the rhythm of him specifically. He couldn't tell anymore where his heartbeat ended, and the other one began. He wasn't alone in the between. He was never alone in the between. Nate didn't turn around. He couldn't. If he looked directly at whatever was breathing behind him, he knew, without knowing how, that something would change. Something permanent. So he moved forward instead. One slow step, then another. The flashlight beam stretched ahead, weak and trembling, and the tunnel finally began to change. The walls weren't smooth anymore. They dipped inward. At first, Nate thought it was damage, erosion maybe, but as he got closer, the shape sharpened into something intentional. Alcoves. Dozen of them, carved at uneven intervals along both sides of the tunnel, just big enough for a person to sit inside. Nate's throat tightened. "Hello?" he whispered. This time, his voice didn't disappear. It came back, soft, layered. "Hello, hello, hello." Not an echo. Too many voices. The flashlight passed over the first alcove and stopped. There was a boy sitting inside. Nate's breath caught so hard it hurt. The boy looked about 12, maybe younger, wearing a faded red sweater and jeans that didn't look modern. His hands rested neatly in his lap, his head tilted slightly forward. His eyes were open, reflecting the flashlight like glass. He didn't blink. Nate staggered back a step, nearly dropping the light. "No," he whispered. "No, no." The beam jerked to the next alcove. Another child. A girl this time. Her hair curled and pinned in a style Nate had only seen in old photographs. A pale yellow dress hung stiff around her knees. Her skin looked too smooth, too perfect. Her chest rose, slow, then fell. Nate's stomach twisted. They were breathing. All of them. The flashlight moved faster now. Left, right, left. And everywhere it landed, there were more. A boy in a Letterman jacket with cracked leather sleeves. A girl barefoot, her dress patterned with tiny flowers from a decade that didn't exist anymore. A kid clutching a lunchbox so tightly his knuckles had gone gray. Different ages, different decades, all sitting perfectly still, all watching him. The breathing filled the tunnel now. Not loud, just synchronized. In, out, in, out. Dozens of chests rising and falling in perfect unison, like something was controlling the rhythm from somewhere deeper in the dark. Nate backed away, shaking his head. "This isn't real," he said. "This isn't..." The flashlight flickered. Once. Twice. Darkness swallowed everything, and in that instant, something moved. The light snapped back on. Every head was still facing forward, except one. Halfway down the row, a boy had turned, slowly, deliberately. His neck angled too far, stopping just short of unnatural. His eyes locked onto Nate, and then, click. The sound was sharp, metallic, like a key turning inside a lock. The boy's mouth opened, not wide, just enough, and a voice came out, not his. "Nate?" The flashlight died completely, and all the breathing stopped. The voice came from everywhere at once, not from the boy in the alcove, not from the tunnel ahead. It filled the dark around Nate like the whole underground had learned how to speak through him. The single word, his name, faded, but the silence that followed was worse, heavy, expectant, waiting for him to answer. "Nate?" This time it was softer, almost kind. He stood frozen with the dead flashlight hanging in his hand, staring into blackness so complete it seemed to press against his eyes. He could hear the children breathing again, but not in the neat rhythm from before. Their breaths had changed, shallow, uneven, afraid. Then the dark ahead of him shifted, not like something moving through it, like the dark itself was peeling back. A shape emerged in pieces at first. Not claws, not teeth, not a body like Nate expected. Just an absence where light should have been. A hole cut into the tunnel that seemed deeper than the tunnel itself. It was standing in the center of the corridor, but standing felt wrong. It looked less like a person and more like a shadow that had learned the outline of one. When it spoke, the voice came in layers. Some were boys, some were girls. One sounded old, cracked, and tired. All of them were children. "We can't leave," it said. The words made Nate's skin crawl because they didn't sound angry. They sounded desperate. "You have to open them," the thing continued. "Every door. From the inside." Nate's mouth had gone dry. "What are you?" A pause. Then, in the voice of a little girl no older than 7, "We were explorers." The tunnel seemed to tighten around that sentence. "We found the doors first," another voice added. "We thought they were hiding places." "We opened one," said a boy. Then another. And another. The voices overlapped, speaking faster now, as if they were remembering all at once. "We didn't know it had to be from inside. We didn't know it could hear names. We didn't know it would follow the open door upstairs." Nate's stomach dropped. He thought of the padlock on his basement door, the open locks in the wall, the chalk mat, the fresh writing. The thing in the dark moved closer without seeming to move at all. Every child in the alcoves began to turn their heads toward their own basement doors, somewhere far above the tunnel. Nate heard it then, faint at first, then clearer. A series of clicks moving through the street, one house at a time. Locks opening. Above him, all along Pine Street, doors were unlocking on their own, one by one. And then the chorus whispered, almost lovingly, "You're next, Nate." Nate didn't think. He just scrambled. He clawed at the concrete, his fingernails tearing as he found the edge of the doorway. He lunged upward, his feet heavy as lead, dragging himself through the narrow gap and into his own basement. He didn't look back at the pale, reflecting eyes or the shifting darkness. He hit the wooden stairs, taking them 3 at a time, and slammed the basement doors shut. The padlock lay on the floor. He didn't stop to fix it. He burst into the kitchen, the afternoon sun blindingly bright and impossibly normal. He collapsed on the linoleum, sobbing, his lungs burning with the metallic, cold air of the tunnels. "Nate!" His mother was there in an instant, dropping a dish towel and kneeling beside him. She grabbed his shoulders, her face a mask of terrifying concern. "Nate, honey, what happened? You're shaking." "The basement," Nate choked out, burying his face in her shirt. "The tunnels, the kids. Mom, there are kids down there. They're stuck. They told me I'm next. We have to leave. We have to leave now." He was hysterical, the words spilling out in a jagged flood. He told her about the map, the breathing, and the boy on the VHS tape from 1987. He gripped her arms, desperate for her to understand, to run, to save them. His mother went very still. The warmth of her hug didn't change, but the air in the kitchen suddenly felt thin. She pulled back just an inch, looking at him with an expression he had never seen before. Not anger, not fear, but a strange, hollow curiosity. "Honey," she said, her voice dropping to a low, melodic pitch. "How do you know about the tape?" Nate froze. The blood in his veins turned to slush. I found it," he whispered. "In the boxes." "No, Nate," she said, her eyes wide and unblinking, reflecting the kitchen light like glass. "I never unpacked the VCR." And you never told me about a boy on a tape. Nate looked around. The house was deathly silent. No hum of the refrigerator, no birds outside, no wind. He realized then that he couldn't remember climbing the last 3 stairs. He looked down at his own hands. They were covered in a thick, rust-colored residue. Dozens of small, wet handprints were smeared across his palms, prints that were too small to be his. From beneath the kitchen floor, rhythmic and patient as a ticking clock, something began to breathe. In, out. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Nate hadn't escaped the network. He had just opened the last door from the inside. He just didn't remember doing it. If you enjoyed this nightmare, subscribe for more. New stories dropping every week. Sleep well, if you can.